What's happening? MC Marcus Chapman here, ready to break down show number 2 in the MC25. This was a show that was done October 8, 2006, and it's called Mandatory HIV Testing. Sounds controversial, doesn't it? Well, it was. This was done on 107.5 WGCI in Chicago on a Sunday afternoon from 2 to 6. So here's the backstory. All right, when I returned to GCI for my third and final time working there in August of 2006, I got put on Saturday night 6 to 10 again. I really didn't want to do that, but, that it was what it was. So in the meantime, as I pointed out for show number 5, should cell phones be banned from schools, and show number 12, why record stores closing, and show number 4, Marcus in the Morning, Teen Mom Abortion. At that time, I was becoming, I wouldn't say more conscious because I was always conscious, but in terms of being more aware of what was going on around me from a news perspective. I was watching the news more often. I was reading the newspapers more often. And at that point, they were transitioning more so to the online stuff. But I was definitely paying attention to what was going on around me. I had really started doing that a lot more, say, around 2004. And by the time 2006 came, when I got back on the air, I really wanted to incorporate a lot of that stuff into the radio shows. I wasn't really interested in doing a lot of party-oriented stuff. I wanted the shows to have more content. I wanted to make people think. And so the main feature that I came up with for the Sunday afternoon show when I started doing that was the 3 o'clock thought. And this was... It wasn't the first 3 o'clock thought I did, but it was the first one that was major. Like, I believe the first one I did was like 2 weeks earlier. And then I did a live broadcast from the GCI Music Seminar on October the 1st. So I didn't do a 3 o'clock thought then. I was like interviewing artists. Matter of fact, a lot of those interviews I posted online. It's a few of them with Me in the Game. Did talk to Chingy that day. I was in there when Young Jock was on there speaking on the mic, telling people what to do. So that whole show was done live at the Hyatt Regency. Matter of fact, that was the last WGCI Music Seminar that was ever held in 2006. So the following week, when I came in for that Sunday show, and I was looking through the paper, the first thing that I saw was the story about mandatory HIV testing, how it was being recommended by Reverend Michael Flager, and the different reactions people were having. Some were saying that, it's good things, it could be invasion of privacy. So I knew that it was a perfect subject to bring to the radio, and it was the type of thing that I really wanted to do because it was something that I felt could impact the community more so than just, the regular party, energy-oriented radio. So when I went in that day, it's interesting. This is one of those situations where there were things happening in the studio as the show was going on. So again, I was doing Saturday night at that time. So I had been on the night before. When I came in that Sunday afternoon and I did my intro, first of all, one of the things that I mentioned once I, gave the rundown on the show, and I went into the first song, which was Justin Timberlake's Sexy Back with Timberland on there. The night before that, I had gone to a party. And I forget the name of the place it was at. It was at a place that had, I think it was Red No 05, or it used to be called Red No 05. And so I remember when that song came on, everybody like jumped up and started dancing, right? And that was real significant because a lot of times at parties, people don't really dance. They just kind of stand around socializing. And so when that came on, people were dancing. And so when I did my first talk break, I mentioned that right away, that this is the hottest song in the clubs. When it comes on, everybody gets up, start dancing, blah, blah, blah. And that was one example of me using things that were going on in real life that I witnessed and experienced and putting it on the radio. Another example of that came when I introduced the topic, where you hear me saying, that I myself went to take an HIV test. And this had been like maybe the previous year when this happened. And the girl who was at the office, I don't know if she was the nurse's assistant, I don't know what her title was, but she looked at my name on it. She was like, Marcus Chapman from GCI. And I had to play it off because I didn't want her to know. It wasn't so much that I didn't want her to know I was taking an HIV test, but I didn't want her knowing my personal information that was on the sheet. You know what I'm saying? So, I kind of played it off, and I mentioned that on the air, and I remember she's like, man, it probably is you. I ain't going to say nothing, though. But when I did the intro to the show, program director Elroy Smith was listening, and I didn't know he was listening, but he called right after I did my intro, and one of the things he told me was that my delivery sounded too much like Saturday night, because this was Sunday afternoon. You know, Sunday afternoon is a little more mellow, low key than Saturday night. So I remember him telling me I needed to slow my delivery down some. You know, I was going through it too fast, and he mentioned he could tell it was going to be a hot show because of the mandatory HIV testing, because I said that was going to be coming up. So I said, okay. So then the next time I talked, I slowed the delivery down some, and I remember him calling back again, and he was like, that's the sound you want for what you're doing, okay? So that was happening while the show was going on. So one of the things you hear me doing is throwback trivia. That was a feature that I brought to the Sunday afternoon show because they were calling it Throwback Sundays. So what I would do is I would look ahead at what music was coming up at certain points in the show, and I would use whatever they had at a certain point, and I would piggyback off of it to come up with a trivia question. So say like, in this one, what was the question? Was, this one, actually I didn't do anything music oriented for this one because I couldn't figure out a way to tie it into anything musically. So I did a throwback question about which comedian had his own show on HBO, and that was the Chris Rock show, which just so happens to be my favorite TV show of all time, period. That Chris Rock show that was on HBO from 1997 to 2000, I love that show. I still watch it. I got plenty of episodes and all that, so I incorporated that. But the main part of the show was the 3 o'clock thought, and that was when I introduced the mandatory HIV testing subject. And people started calling right away, giving their opinions, saying whether or not they thought it was a good idea or whether or not they thought it was an invasion of privacy. Some people had a problem with the word mandatory, but I thought it was an excellent idea because HIV is a serious issue, period, for everybody, but especially in Black communities around the country. And I've always personally felt that it's something that you could prevent if you, number one, get tested, but also your sexual behavior has to be, you got to strap up. Bottom line, it's no secret. I don't have any kids. It ain't because I can't have none. It's because I always made it a point to protect myself, and a lot of times people, especially get in relationships, they may start out using condoms and then they get comfortable with each other. The girls start saying, oh, well, this is my man. I don't want him to have to use that because he ain't with nobody but me. The guy like, this is my girl. She ain't with nobody but me. And then they stop using protection. And the problem with that is if you have those relationships like that, and at some point they come to an end, which in most cases they do, unless you get married and stay married, then you get with somebody else and that whole behavior starts all over again. So even if you're not messing around with a lot of people, before you know it, you may have had 3 or 4 partners or more where you weren't using protection, and now you putting yourself at risk and other people at risk. Or, as was pointed out in the newspaper article, you have people going to prison, having unprotected sex in prison, let's just keep it real, and then coming back into the community and infecting other people. Ladies, a lot of times, let's just keep it real, y'all mess around with these thugs, been to jail, that may seem exciting, or, ooh, he's strong, whatever. If them cats got messed around with or did some messing around with other men while they was locked down, and then they getting out and they messing with you, there's a chance you putting yourself at risk. So all those were factors that I felt needed to be addressed, and why this was a major topic for people to talk about on the radio, and that's why I brought it to the table. The unfortunate thing is that this was an era where we had begun recording the shows on CDs. I'd say it started like maybe around 2004. Prior to that, we recorded on cassettes, and the CDs, the blank CDs, could hold like 79 minutes of audio, but they could also only hold so many tracks. So the CD that I was using at that time, I had used for a couple of shows before that, and it was nowhere near 79 minutes of audio, but I didn't realize at the time that I could only have so many tracks. So at a certain point, the CD stopped recording, and I didn't know that because the place where we put the blank CD wasn't in the actual studio with us. There was another room in the back that we had to go to. All the Clear Channel at that time, now it's iHeart, but it was Clear Channel. All their stations, there was a room where you would have to take your blank CD, put it in a machine that was designated for your station, and then that would record your show. But when I got to the end of the show and I went back to get mine, I didn't even know until later on when I tried to listen to it that the whole show didn't record. So it actually stopped recording after the first segment of phone calls that I aired, because I did 3 because they had 3 commercial breaks. So unfortunately, you only get to hear the first part of the discussion. You hear me bring it up, you hear me air a few calls, and then you hear me air the first section of calls that went into commercial break. You don't hear anything else from the show. So that's all that I have. I only have, the whole thing lasts about 14 minutes, when in reality the show would have taken up maybe about 35 minutes or so. But that's all I have of it. However, the reason why, even without me having the whole show available, that it lands at number 2 is because I remember how big of a deal it was at the time when I did it. But also, the following weekend, I was at a party on Saturday night at a spot called Joe's. It's still open here in Chicago on 940 West Weed Street. And it was a strip where you had all these different clubs. And it was a party at Joe's. And I remember there was a young lady in her 20s who I ended up meeting. And I remember her telling me that she heard the show that I did about HIV and how she really appreciated me bringing that subject to the radio. And she thought it was a really good topic to discuss. And she was thanking me for doing it. And out of all my years in radio, I've had people come up to me and tell me they liked how I sounded, or you do a good job. I've heard general comments just about how great somebody thought I was or something like that. But that's the only time anybody said anything to me about one particular thing that they heard me do on the air and how much it impacted them, or how much they thought of it, or how good they thought it was that I did it. And so that was really the confirmation for me, knowing that not only was it a good topic, but the whole concept of the 3 o'clock thought was to make people think and to impact people stronger. And, just bring something to radio that, maybe they weren't going to get somewhere else. And so I felt really proud that I had that kind of impact, and that it impacted her like that, and that she thought it was a big deal. And that's pretty much what I was going for. I wasn't expecting anybody to stop me in the street and say anything about it, but I was definitely going for a situation where I was having that strong of an impact on people with the content that I brought to the radio. So out of this whole era, I did these 3 o'clock thoughts, and then on Saturday mornings I started doing the 8 o'clock opinion poll. And I did those type of topics, depending on what was in the news, from October 2006 until about, say, maybe March or April of 2007. And this, I feel, was the strongest one. Obviously, the ones at number 4 and number 5, those are strong as well. But the mandatory HIV testing, I think, was the strongest one. It had a strong impact. And the fact that somebody came up to me and mentioned that specifically definitely was a sign that I was on the right track for what I was doing. So that's the main reason why I picked this at number 2. I think it's a good show. I think it starts out good. The sound is good. When I changed the sound, slowed my delivery down, that was good. But the subject matter of the day, that's what really makes this show number 2. And it's a show that I'm very proud of. I wish you could hear more of it if you listen to the clip. But, what's there is there, and I know what kind of impact that it had. So it's a show I'm very proud of. That's why I pick it for number 2, even though you can't hear the whole thing. It stands at number 2. And there's only one show left in MC25. All right, one more. What is it going to be? What year? What station? What time? What day? What happened? That's going to be coming up next at number 1. But for now, the number 2 show, MC25, mandatory HIV testing, October 8, 2006 on WGCI. MC Marcus Chapman brought it to you. It's a show I definitely want to be remembered for. That's why it's at number 2.